Meek from Maryland, who is saying, I'm not sure to identify as an atheist or a theist. Let's have that conversation, Meek. Thank you for calling. Talk us through it, please, if you will.
Sure. It's just not being able to identify who I am as others perceive it. Like I'm aware of my own history, and I'm aware of right now, but I don't think any of us are aware of any kind of future. You know what I mean? So I see all the time how when I identify a certain way, it triggers this conversation pattern that always just ends up like into this yes no thing, or it just always seems like a trap to me. And I've never really been able to do it. I just kind of use them in conversations when needed.
Do you have a lot of these conversations where you feel compelled to identify one way or the other?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have to for, work or just buy milk. You know what I mean? Like people, like when you call here or anywhere else, I mean, you guys are understanding about it, but if I call somewhere else and they ask me questions about myself and I can't answer it properly or quickly, it's an issue. So I can work within it, but it's just not something I hold to personally.
Do you feel at all like you're still religious, or in the times where you identify as Christian, you're just doing it to stop a conversation?
I don't know if I've ever really been Christian or not. I was born, I guess, atheist. I have a atheist father and maybe a lazy Christian mother. I think she's atheist too. I'm not sure. Really, we don't talk about that much. But yeah, it was just not really something we cared about either way. I mean, everybody else does, obviously. So I just have to be careful about other people's. I try to be respectful because I have to go into other people's personal spaces and try to help them do whatever, if I'm doing a plumbing job or if I'm over there just hanging out, it's their own personal space. And I think the best way for me to be respectful is not to come at somebody with all of my, all of that. Especially the people that know me, they already know who I am. I've been doing this my whole life, so it's not difficult for me, but it's difficult when people know me for a long time and they don't realize that until later, or they know about it, but they get like it's complicated, as you can imagine.
Do you ever feel like the responding in a way like, oh, I'm respectful of everybody's beliefs, as opposed to giving a title, as opposed to saying I'm an atheist or I'm agnostic, or lying and saying that you're a Christian or something? Do you think that in these scenarios it would be valuable to say, you know what, I'm just respectful of everybody's beliefs, and just leaving it there?
That's what
Got it.
Yeah, that's what I try to do. I don't lie to people.
Right.
I'll agree with them on certain issues, but I think in their head, they get these, they're like, okay, agreed with me on this, and they agree with me on this and this, so they're probably this. And then that's where their label is. And then they hear me say something to somebody else or something else, and I'm like, okay, he's a liar. Okay, or he's this, or whatever. So I can see why it's difficult for others to not be able to label others, but I think that's just a huge trap we all fall into, unfortunately.
Right.
Like when we create separate communities, like LGBTQ or whatever the fuck conspiracy people do, it just separates us more. And then when we try to come together, it's like we just have these clear circles around ourselves, and it gets messy when we try to get together and be in a common place just to, fart or eat or whatever we got to do together sometimes, because we want to be social, but we also need to be private. And it's tricky. It's really tricky because, just navigating through a place you go to every day, when somebody sees you and they see you doing something they don't have ever seen you do before, then instantly they're just like, their judgment of them changes, and it can flip quick. And when it happens, people, it throws them through a loop too. So I try to let people know about it right away, but I don't think it really sinks in until they see it really. So that's why I'd rather show than tell, I guess.
Do you find yourself in any scenarios where you can let them know, or you can set a boundary where you're like, hey, I don't like to talk about religion, and then just move forward? Is that a possibility at all in any of these scenarios you find yourself in, where you're like, hey, I'd love to hang out, I'd love to get together, but if you don't mind, I'm trying to detox from talking about, religion or any of this stuff. I just want to have a good time. Is that a possibility in any of these scenarios?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of places out there that, like you can't, most places are just like no religion, no politics talk here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's what most people try to create, that because it creates such a hostile environment where people just want to go and get a drink of fucking coffee or something. And so that's all I really am trying to do, like personally with my own self. So I think just from the jump, I just was very hard for me to understand what other people meant when they were talking about atheism or theism or what they don't know. Or like, why are you going to tell me what you don't know? I just never understood how people can add that up.
Are these people that you at all can change how often you see them? Like, is it a situation where you really care about these people and you still want to see them, but every time you hang out, this comes up? Or is it a situation where maybe you can slowly remove yourself from these conversations and these social groups without having to break up with them? Or is it like a job where you have to go every day?
Each one's, different. So the jobs are the most complicated because of the work I do. So as soon as I leave a job, of course they're going to be like, oh boy, what's this nut going to do? And I just want to move on with my life. And I guess everybody has to be defensive because we're all snake oil salesmen in a way. We all have the ability to be anything, and I just am very aware of that, and I try to make sure I don't come off that way, or if I start sensing that I do, I just back out of the situation and try to reapproach it later.
Interesting. Do you find that it's exhausting for you to ever just let them talk and not engage? For example, at a past job I had, they loved bringing up politics and they loved bringing up religion in the office because it was more of like I dare somebody to disagree with this in front of everybody. It's like an open work environment. So I just wouldn't engage.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say, okay. And when they would say, well, what are your thoughts? I'd be like, I'm working, and just shut it down without giving any indication of what side I'm on. Is that something that you would be like into trying, or is it one of those, I really hate having to hear this stuff at work in general, like it's just exhausting to be in the room?
No, I love it. I grew up with a large family. We're around a lot of large families, so I don't mind other people's opinions. I enjoy listening more than I do talking.
That right there is a great way to approach these scenarios. I love listening. I'm not a big talker. I'm a lurker. I love listening. Please continue. Or I'm just enjoying the conversation. I'm just listening. I feel like that's a good way to kind of in a neutral way say, don't ask me stuff. I'm just going to sit here and listen to you talk, because after a while they stop talking because they're just the ones talking, or they're only being spoken to by people who agree with them, and it's kind of boring. So, I mean, maybe that's an approach you can take where you say, oh, I'm just listening. I'm just enjoying the conversation. It's like a podcast. I don't really like to talk.
Yeah, so I'm slowly working on like that kind of just giving myself time to be quiet. It's like my own So,
and because it's tough to argue with that when somebody's like, I don't really like talking. It's tough to really pick on them for that, as opposed to, I don't really talk about religion much. That piques people's interest because they say, well, why? What side are you on? When you're like, I'm an introvert. I just like to listen. I almost feel like people, for some reason, respect that a lot more, in a way. Richard, I don't know if you agree.
Yeah,
sorry.
I'd absolutely agree, and I think it's I think being honest, you know, there's that old saying, "Honesty is the best policy." I think in a lot of cases it is, and as long as you're not putting yourself in a position where you're going to be kind of ostracized, or you're not relying on someone financially or anything like that, which it doesn't sound like you're particularly in that position. I think if as long as you're not in those positions, and as long as you're not coming across as aggressive, as long as you're being true to yourself, and just saying, look, this is where I stand. I'm not 100% convinced. I don't really know all the answers, but this is where I stand, and I'd like to have the conversation with you. I think people are usually pretty receptive to that.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with that. I had a boss once, and he told me, he said, you can't say no to money unless you have fuck you money.
Yeah.
And he's right. I mean, that was one of the big lessons in my life, because like wage slavery and stuff, you know what I mean? It's like people just own you when they know that you need what they have, and they'll just slowly feed you like that little drops of pennies, you know. And when he told me that, it was just so obvious, you know.
Yeah. They might own where you have to be, but they don't own what you get to say or what you have to say, if that makes sense. Nobody can own whether or not you'll engage in a conversation at all, whether you choose to engage. And if they do, it makes them look worse, if that makes sense. In order to really pull you out of your shell and like pry you out against your will, I don't think anybody really has the time or the energy for that beyond a certain point. I feel like we all work with the bully at one point. So come on, come on, come on. But that's the extent of it. It's
Right.
like, nope, thanks, nope, thanks, no thanks. Just no, not engaging. Thank you.
Yeah, I think growing up as like a yes man my whole life is like no is my
Yeah.
you know, it's yeah.
Finding new ways to say no, new polite ways to say no. No, thanks. I'm good. I say that a lot too. That always confuses people when they're like, what do you think about this? I say, I'm good. And they pause for a second because that doesn't sound like an answer that makes sense with the question they just asked. And then they ask it again. I'm like, I'm good. Y'all talk. I'm good. And then they just stop asking because I'm boring.
Right. It's funny too, because even like the way you say no, like you could say no thank you, or you could say I'm good, or you know, no worries. But some people are even offended when you say no worries, because they take it as like, oh, you're making it sound like I need, you know, like even that's tricky. So it's I've learned, I usually just try to like gauge the person's intent when they talk and see like what they want. Like we all do, you know what I mean? And then go from there.
Yeah, or if you say things like, honestly, I haven't even had my coffee yet. That's one that gets people to stop talking to me too. They'll be, what do you think about this? Honestly, I haven't even had my coffee yet. And then they laugh, right? But the kind of people that will get offended over things like I'm good are also the kind of people where there will be no value in that conversation whatsoever anyway. And you know that going in. So doing whatever you can do to avoid that conversation in general is probably better for anyone, because they already seem a little slightly ready to go, kind of triggered and ready to have like a fight. And so, you know, at that point, engaging with them isn't even going to do you any good to begin with. You're not going to be able to say the correct answer, even if you agree with them. So that's almost a sign that disengaging is even more important. And if I've only had to use this once or twice, but when you say something like, oh, I'm good, no thanks, I'm good, and people still dig, I go, are you okay? Are you feeling okay? Okay, just making sure. And then just checking out of the conversation.
Yeah, I wish cops understood that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know what you mean. Like,
yeah. Just like, are you okay? Because then they start looking back on everything they said, and they're like, oh, maybe I did sound a little nuts there for a second. But I don't know. That sounds tough, though. I sympathize with that situation, because when people think that they own you in any way, whether it's professionally or personally, it's always tough. And you feel like you owe them something when you really don't. You don't owe them anything. And if they're going to keep pressing the matter, it sounds like you're not going to get out of it unscathed anyway. So avoiding the conversation isn't even going to go worse than engaging in the conversation. It can only go downhill from there.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds tough.
glad
I'm
I
sorry
called.
you have to deal with that.
It's okay. It's been 43 years of it, so I'm used to
Yeah.
it a bit. You know, it's
Yeah.
just different new challenges each time. As soon as I think I got one down, I'm like, okay, cool, nailed this, and then another one hits me in the face. I'm like, oh shit, here we go again.
Not again. Ah, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds tough, Meek. It really, really does sound tough. I think this is a great. This is one of those calls which is really great because I think there's a lot of people who are probably in your position who don't get the chance to call in, and they don't get the chance to kind of talk this over with people. They're just in that position that you're in day after day after day. And I think these are really productive calls because these aren't calls that are just helpful for you who is calling and wants to discuss it, but they're really, really valuable for so many people out there listening. And I really, really do approach you bringing this topic up. Is there anything else you'd kind of like to go through just before we let you go?
No, that's it. That was good. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
No,
Thanks for calling in.
absolutely. And we appreciate you calling. It is, like I say, it's such an important subject to bring up. And it is one of those which isn't talked about that much.